shit's been a little crazy lately. So that's something. But I have been working on bikes. I got a whole bunch of bikes listed and had a whole bunch of tools in and everything. So I've been trying to figure out a good way to record bicycles, because I noticed that when I try to record a bicycle, I mean, you know, depending on how much detail I want to go into, and I don't know, and I don't necessarily want to edit anything, because it seems important that the whole process is recorded. You know, I could skim over what I believe to be a small detail and somebody else is struggling on. So I don't want to do that at all. So I've been trying to figure out like how I'm going to do this. So for now, I'm going to do some little basic shit. What I mean by that is, today we're going to be overhauling a hub. Let's just start with that. Today we're just going to be overhauling a hub, a rear hub. That seems like the pretty straightforward one. I don't quite have all the camera angles worked out and everything. I got to actually build like a rig along this. Let's see, where can you guys see along this like that box right there? I'll build like a little ridge so I can clamp on this gimbal. I don't really prefer this tether hanging off of me. It's making me work differently, but you know, working with what I got. So this wheel that I got, let's talk about that for a bit. I stripped this bike down to the frame. It was a nice bike. It was a Trek. So I got this wheel. It's a Bontrager rim, which makes it a Trek. It has a broken axle. So let's see. Right. So I can pull on this end and pull on this end at the same time on the actual axle nuts. So you can see I'm jiggling this on the cones, and the other side isn't moving at all. This side is fully independent. That means that the axle is broken. This broken axle actually wound up turning into a broken frame because it wasn't repaired quick enough. So somebody rode on it too long. So basically what happens is I'm going to pull out this quick release. There's the broken axle. They usually break right there on the cone. That's where the stress point is. There's the other portion of it. Right there. So you can see right where it broke. With all that grease and shit. So usually you have to take apart the axle after this step. But in this case it's a broken axle. So it's call it a quick release. So you see this tool right here. That's a freewheel tool. The freewheel tool removes the freewheel. You can use the crescent wrench. I like to put it in the vise and use the wheel itself as leverage. You just pop it on, and then you turn the wheel. Pop it off. There's all the gears. This is called the dork disc. These guys belong straight in the trash can. So you can see that there's splines inside of there that line up. If you were to try to spin the actual, run that up for a second. If you were to try to actually spin these gears off counterclockwise, so if I'm looking at it, let's do it like this. Try to spin it counterclockwise, it freewheels, but it still has threads and it's threaded onto the hub. So they put a tooling on the inside. Not every single one of them is going to have tooling. The ones that aren't are a complete fucking nightmare and I hate them. You basically, basically there's no way to remove it off the wheel, so that thing is permanently on there. So if you have a problem, you got a fucking problem. Let's grab a smaller screwdriver. So the next thing is going to be the dust caps. See, can you guys see okay? Yeah, it's going to be dust caps. So I just like to get a screwdriver and give it a little pop. Now we're gonna have bearings. So I'm gonna take these bearings. I always, whenever I do hubs and bottom brackets, loose ball bottom brackets, I kind of take the shittiest rag in the shop because it's gonna get shittier. It's gonna get raw grease on it, like, because you wipe off excess with it. So this hub is a virgin, meaning it's never been taken apart. It has factory grease. On the other side, there goes a bearing. I can tell it's factory grease from experience. It's usually like almost looks like honey. A lot of shops use the Park Tool grease, which is green. I use a blue Maxima grease, it's for dirt bikes actually, but it works perfectly well, and you can get it from bicycle wholesalers. So it's just a standard bearing grease. Bearing grease is bearing grease. Whether it's going on, I've rebuilt the axles of my car out with it. You know, working on bicycles, motorcycles, it's all the same. Bearing grease is bearing grease. There's different kinds of bearing grease, but this is fine. So next thing you want to do is just sort of clean it out. What I actually like to do in the shop environment, because speed and efficiency and all that, is I'll actually take it, I will balance it on my finger, and I will spin the wheel while it's balanced on my finger. That's the quickest way to do it. Of course, I'm working in more confined space. And then you inspect the race. Let's see how close I can get you guys in here. So you look for it, and another thing you can do is take your fingernail, or you can take a dental pick. Don't push on the dental pick, just run the dental pick. Feel for grooves. This is running perfectly smooth. I can see that it has been polished on the bearing contact surface, but it is like not even so much polished. Like when they cast these, obviously a casting is going to leave more of a matte finish, and then the bearings will kind of knock off the high points of that matte finish and make it into more of a sheen. This quick release is actually bent. I don't know if you can see that. So the next step is to get this quick release out of here, I suppose. I want to reuse this quick release. I don't really have too many, so I just got to find the bend. Don't worry too much about destroying threads. Bend it straight. Ish. Another thing to do is pop it up in the vise. And if it wants to turn on you, that's good. Like if it wants to turn your hand, that means that you're at the high point and it wants to settle into the low point. It's a little better. A little better. And it's out. Just like that. So now we have a dust cap, and we have two pieces of axle. So the first thing we want to find is the right tooling for the inside cone. The outside cone is 90% of the time going to be a 17 millimeter. So in this case, I don't always do this, but it tends to work pretty well. I'll take a impact driver on a socket, a crescent wrench, a 17 millimeter wrench, you know, anything that is 17 millimeters will work for this. But in the interest of time, I'm going to just use the impact. So when that comes off, just threads off, and you got this. So we need to remember that this is the right side. And how I remember that is on my bench, I set it, oh God, I set it on the right hand side. So that is the right hand dust cap, that is the left hand dust cap. Those two dust caps are virtually identical, but, sorry, I'm an idiot. That's the left hand side. Anyways, they're virtually identical. These are not, the cones are not, because they're running different spacers and different lock nuts. So I'll show you that difference in just a sec. But just in the interest of keeping everything symmetrical, it's always nice to just have a bench that has enough space to be able to go, okay, this one's the right hand one, this one's the left hand one. You guys are technically upside down, so the rights might be left, so the lefts might be rights. That's the axle. That is in two pieces. Here's our new axle. As you can see, the new axle does come with cones and lock nuts. However, they're not all created equal. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bust off these cones and lock nuts. I'm going to put them on what I assume them to be their respective sides. Because usually on the right hand side you're going to have a bigger spacer. That's to clear the freewheel. So because this side has a spacer and this side doesn't, that means that this side is most likely intended to be the left. And this side's intended to be the right. Grab the right tool. Yeah, man, shit's been crazy. But I'm excited to make my first bicycle video. Something that's just like really specifically bicycles. There's not really too many updates on the shop. I haven't really done too much. I always want to confirm that this is the right length of axle. I was fairly sure from just rote memorization that it was 146 millimeters. But if you are unsure, take it apart. You know, bring it into a bike shop. If you have a tape measure that is metric, just put them as close as you can together and put them like this. And that comes out to, well, technically 145, right? But if you go into a bike shop and say I have a 145 millimeter axle, they're going to sell you a 146 millimeter axle. So as long as you can get it within 2 millimeters, then you're golden. Anyways, so like I said, not all cones and lock nuts are created equal. There are going to be different length of spacers. In this case, you see how the original spacer is actually longer than the new spacer, which means I'm not going to use the new spacer. I'm going to use the old one. Right, I'm obviously just going to use the old lock nut. There's no way that there's going to be damage to that. The important one is going to be the cone. That is the surface that your bearing's made up to. So, clean it with a reasonably clean rag and inspect it. Let's bring you guys so I can see you too. And if you look at it, yes, it is polished, but it is not necessarily pitted. And by pitted, I mean like you will see that there is actually physical damage to it. It almost looks like, what does it look like? It looks like foam in a sense. I mean, but it's like reverse foam where there's actually like little tiny chunks taken out of it. So when there's little tiny chunks taken out of it, it's pitted. There's been like little impacts that the bearing has dug out of the cone. And same goes for the bearings when we get to those. The bearings can be pitted as well. This bike, I wouldn't say it was low mileage, but the lady that was riding it wasn't necessarily large, and you know, it's kind of difficult to actually make that happen. It takes a lot of miles and a lot of hard riding miles. They live on a big hill, and the husband decided to ride it, and he snapped the axle, and then it got ridden some more, and it actually snapped the dropout out of the frame. One of the first times I've ever seen a trike break like that. There had to have been some sort of defect in the weld or of some sort, because I've seen way shittier bikes come in with broken axles that have been ridden for way longer and they didn't snap the frame. So I'm guessing it was a imperfection in the weld. It broke right on the weld. So I just cleaned the boot up a little bit. So I'm actually just going to completely reuse the cones, spacers, and lock nuts, because the cones are in good shape. And the spacers can't really go wrong. The lock nuts can't really go wrong unless they strip. So in this case, everything's good. So I'm going to start by threading one side of this axle. Let's do the right hand side. Now I'm going to thread this down pretty far. Remember, this is the first piece, so there's also going to be a spacer and a lock nut. So I'm going to go about that far. I can go a little farther than that. About that far. So if you look at a lock nut, they have these serrations in them. See them? In this case, the serrations are on both sides. If the serrations are not on both sides, then the serrations will always face outwards towards the dropout. They do that for more grip on the dropout. I'm going to do this hand tight. So that is the first side of the axle done. Now we're going to move on to the bearings. Let me just move that up, move that up. Here are the bearings. So these are all pretty damn clean. I mean, I could have definitely picked something crustier. Just gonna work them maybe in the rag. If they're crustier, then I will kind of go individually and clean up the bearings. No, it's really important that we count these. There should be 18, if memory serves. 18. 99.9% of the time, it doesn't really matter the size. There's going to be 18 bearings, 9 on each side. It seems like an arbitrary number, but it's an important number when it comes to hubs. So now we have the hub race cleaned, we have the cones cleaned, and we have the bearings cleaned. Now it's time for the grease side. Take a reasonably clean rag, give it one last little look over and wipe down. I'm sorry, this is out of frame, but so you might remember that I greased up the right side first, or that I assembled the right side of the axle first. So I'm going to take the grease. This is that Maxima grease if you guys are interested. It's a tub of it. You can also get Park Tool grease, any sort of lithium grease. Red and tacky works good. I've used that before. I like this grease because it is nice and sticky and I can work it with my finger. Now I'm going to fill up that cup and I kind of go like that and I work it in because it's going to trap air bubbles. So if you kind of work it into the race, then you're going to have an easier time building this hub. A loose ball. The next side. Get another fingerful. And just work that into the hub. This process can be a little bit messy. So like I said, I always use the dirtiest rag in the shop because I wipe my fingers on it, it's going to have raw exposed grease all over it, and it usually winds up in the trash can. So I assembled the right side of the axle first. So I'm going to start with the right side of the wheel. Remember, there are 18. There's always going to be an even number. So in this case, I'm going to put 9 right here. And you just push them down until they stop. Then I like to sort of run my finger around and try to create a laminar layer, and that makes it easier to see, and like a smooth layer that's somewhat transparent. And that way I can double count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I got 9 bearings in there. Flip it over. And because I kind of work them in through the grease, they're going to hold themselves there. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Alright, I have no bearings left. That means I must have done something right. You literally cannot put too much grease. There might be some scenario where you could overpack the bearings, but I'd find that to be pretty damn impossible. Next step, dust caps. Or race caps, sorry. I guess you can call them either. They do the same thing. So what I'm going to do, can you guys see me? Yes, you can, just barely. So it's always rubber side out. You can just push it in. It will extrude some grease. So that's the excess. It like kind of gets rid of any excess that you might have. Keeps dust out. That's what kind of makes these hubs automatic. Is even if you did pack it too much, then you know it's either going to go into the hub shell and not be used, or it's just going to extrude itself out. And you just wipe that away. Sometimes these guys need a little helping hand. Where's my hammer? Hammer. And a small punch. You're not really supposed to do this, but it's like 2 o'clock in the morning and my hands are so fucking tired that I can't do that by hand anymore. So the next step, this is the threaded side. Make sure you guys can see. This is the threaded side. That means that's the right hand side. You're just going to take the axle and push it through. Now the axle pushed out a lot of grease. I take that grease and I sort of pinch it with my fingers and make sure that there's not a bearing in there. There shouldn't be, but it would kind of suck if there was and you didn't notice. Bring you guys back, bring you guys up. There you go. So I'm just going to thread on the other side of this lock nut, or the cone. The cone is tapered so that it pushes the bearings against the race. That's why it's called a cone. This is always the most tedious process. With like little kids' bikes that are run like a coaster brake that isn't a through axle, sometimes you gotta put training wheels on it. You have to run a longer axle, and those axles are long as fuck, and it takes forever. So as you guys can see, these axles, you guys can't see, these axles are not even. That little threaded portion, that's long, that's shy. That's why this is hand tight. So I can just unthread this guy a little bit. Hold my hand tight 15 minutes ago was tighter than what I can handle right now, I guess. So I got them about even. If you really wanted to be super meticulous, you can count the threads, but I'm within about a thread, so there's no point. And plus the hub still needs to be tensioned and locked. So these are acting as a jam nut sort of system that you see on a lot of automotive suspension, where basically you back one of them into the other and tighten the other one into the other, and it makes it so that neither of them can turn. Just like that. So now this one can't turn by itself. It's not going to change adjustment. And this invariably makes the axle too loose. Did I nail it? I nailed it. Well, let's pretend it's too loose. So right now the axle is too loose. So one thing you can do is, remember these are both 17 millimeters. You don't have to have exact tools. As long as you know that it's 17 millimeter. You can use crescent wrenches, 17 millimeter wrenches, sockets, cone wrenches, whatever. So you just take the two ends, the two outsides, and you twist them in towards each other. Then tighten on both sides. That just tightened the hub. Now say in the off chance that it is too tight, you can undo the lock nut. You can back them out some, like this. Undo the lock nut. Remember, this one never moved because the wrench was holding it in place. So you just back it off, maybe a quarter turn or so. And then you lock it back down. And that's still perfect. take this boot, you pop it back on, just like that. That just makes it look good. You take a reasonably clean rag, you wipe off the excess grease. It's normal to get grease in the spokes and, you know, wrenches flying. Just make sure that you don't leave a mess when you're done. So that's all clean. So the hub flanges and the axles are now clean of grease, and that is the important part. That's much straighter. As for the freewheel, just take a little lick of grease, put it on the threads. It's going to help the next guy out. And take the freewheel, and you just go like that. So, with freewheels, as you pedal, it's going to go in the tightening direction. They're going to be self-tightening. So, that's about as tight as you need to get it, because the first time you go test ride it, it's going to tighten and you don't have to worry about it. Make sure that you got the freewheel just free enough, or the quick release, if your quick release is bent, just free enough to be able to cycle through like this, and that ought to do it. The next step, whoop, you guys can almost see, is to install it on the bike. Like I said, working with the cord, man, it's kind of rough. Make sure that your derailleur is in the lowest gear, the smallest ring. Put that chain on the smallest ring of the gear. Tighten it up. You want the cam to start engaging about halfway through the travel. Right about there. See how it's going to hold itself? Let me bring you guys out. So the cam starts engaging right there. Then you just take your thumb and you press it over. And it's good. You have a fully rebuilt hub. And in terms of the self-tightening freewheel, so I can give it its first pedal. It looks like I tightened it pretty good by hand, but I guarantee you when I put my foot on there, it's going to turn just a little tiny bit. That's perfectly normal.